The layers of necessity instructional design model was developed from the need and recognition that instructional design models like the Dick and Carey model could be too precise and that you must be practical in the everyday environment while ensuring that the content remains uncompromised. Martin Tesmer and John Wedman are the creators of this model. And here are the characteristics. Instructional designers create multiple layers of instruction that are based on the constraints present in the task, the time frame for completing the instructional design project, and the available resources. The layers of necessity model can be overlaid on top of existing instructional design models like the Dick and Carey model. The fundamental relevant tasks are completed at the first layer, and then as there are available time and resources, you can add additional details in the additional process layers. So the purpose for using a layered approach is to promote efficient instructional design and development. This is about doing what is needed to create adequate instruction, getting the job done, and then as you have additional time and resources, you can do more. So here's how it looks. From simple to complex, and from limited time resources to ample time resources, we have these layers that we can work through. The first layer are again the essential things that we would need to do to complete that instructional design product. Perhaps we have the limitations of having 2 weeks to complete it. So what will we need to do to get some instruction developed in that constraint of a limited time frame? And so we would complete layer 1 and we would consider what we might have available to complete in some of the additional layers. And the quality can vary depending on how much time and resources we have, but we're trying to get it to a quality level that is adequate. It may not be ideal, but it's adequate to complete that instruction within the time frame. So let's compare the traditional instructional design model like the Dick and Carey model, which you'll be familiar with, and the layers of necessity model. So in the traditional model, you want to complete a task like the goal analysis phase or instructional materials development phase. In the layers of necessity model, you want to focus on task enhancement. So each task is completed just enough to get the immediate job done. And this may mean that components of the instructional design process are repeated to a greater degree of precision and sophistication in subsequent layers. So you may, for instance, complete some aspects of goal analysis in layer 1 and then are able to really delve into subordinate skills analysis and some of the more time-consuming aspects in further layers. The purpose of the subsequent layers is to enhance the work that was previously completed. So you may have found this as you've been working through the Dick and Carey model. You would do some of the essentials first, and then as you had more and more time, you could then enhance that work and go deeper and more developed. The traditional instructional design model is a very procedure-based design, but in layers of necessity, it's principle-based design. Principles, not procedures, govern what is done at each layer. And there are 2 sets of principles. The layer selection principles determine which instructional design activities are appropriate within those time and resource constraints. And then the layer implementation principles govern how the various design and development activities are implemented. Another comparison that we could make is that the traditional instructional design models tend to have discrete stages that we move through. I think about the Dick and Carey model conceptually, how you would start with identifying your goal and analyzing it and breaking the tasks down and doing your learner analysis, and then moving on to developing your assessments, and then moving on to developing your instructional materials, and so on and so forth. But in the layers of necessity model, you can merge these different tasks to reduce the analysis to the minimum. And so things could be completed and developed concurrently. The layers are not distinguished by the type of task, but by the level of complexity associated with those tasks. Discrete tasks of a layer are unified by a common purpose that they add to the design development within the project's constraints. So again, you could analyze some aspect of your learners or your context at the same time that you might be going through identifying what some materials are available to teach the content. So another comparison that we could make is that the traditional instructional design models tend to have a very comprehensive perspective, and that makes them quite detailed and lengthy, as you have experienced in the Dick and Carey model. And the layers of necessity is more of an opportunistic perspective in that you can adjust your project scope to what is immediately available at hand. It's very practical and realistic within the constraints that happen in real life projects. So components could be minimized or deleted, which happens in practice depending upon the constraints and the goals of the project. So as an instructional designer, you make decisions about what is feasible within the constraints that you have, and it's okay to minimize, to abbreviate, or even delete some of the steps that you might go through in a very comprehensive instructional design process like the Dick and Carey process that you have experienced. So in traditional instructional design models, they are very effectiveness based. We want to have designed instruction that is going to be very effective and be optimal, but in the layers of necessity, we're designing instruction to be good enough, to be adequate within the constraints that we have. It's efficiency based. And so we accept that the effectiveness of the training may be suboptimal because we're favoring getting the training done within the constraints. The instructional design activities could first be adapted to the time and resource constraints of the project, and then if we find that we have additional time and resources, we could then build on it and going into further layers. But we're at least getting that project done for the client. A lot of times this model is done when we are completing it for a client, as in the true sense of an instructional design position. So here's another way to look at it through those layers. And what actually happens in layer 1 is that you can see there are 5 activities. These are the essentials that need to be completed within the model. So you would do what's called a situational assessment, develop materials, goal analysis, develop your instructional strategy, and go through some form of evaluation and revision. So let's take a look at an example within level 1. So when the time and resource constraints are significant, you would do level 1 situational assessment, and in this you would ask questions like, what performance improvement is required? Will instruction improve the performance? Who will receive the instruction, and what are the resource and time constraints? So you can see somewhat of the learner and context analysis within a situational assessment, but it's not as thorough and drawn out as what you would do in a learner and context analysis in the Dick and Carey model. It's just the essentials of what you need to understand the situation that the instruction would be designed for. In the goal and task analysis, you're asking questions like, what is the instructional goal? What will the performer do when performing the goal, and what learning domains are involved? But you're not breaking the task down into its component steps and skills, and subordinate skills and entry-level skills, which takes quite a bit of time. You're just asking, what is the goal? What do they need to do? And what kind of learning domains are involved? In the instructional strategy development, we are identifying appropriate, effective instructional strategies, and we ask things like, given the learning domains and audience, what instructional strategies are most likely to be effective and efficient for the instructional outcome and what strategy will work within the situational constraints. So we have what could work and what can we actually do within the constraints that we have. In the materials development activity within layer 1, you're going to try to find what materials can be used to deliver the instruction in a timely and economical manner. And most likely this will be curating content that's already been developed. You may not have time to create things from scratch. So you're trying to find what can you select and modify to meet the instructional need. In the evaluation and revision activity, you are asking, is the content accurate? Is the instructional strategy adequate? And what revision must be made before full-scale implementation? And here's what it would look like to do layer 1, and then if you had time to add on additional layers. So in layer 1, we are asking, for instance, those questions about, is the content accurate? Is the instructional strategy adequate? And what revision could be made? If we had time to do a second layer, we could do some multiple one-to-one evaluations. We could, and for the situational assessment, we could perhaps carry out a full-blown needs assessment. If we had more time in the goal analysis task, we could then do a subordinate skills analysis. In instructional strategy development, we could look at the events of instruction, Gagne's 9 events of instruction, and develop some content for that. In materials development, we could develop a student manual. So as you go out, these represent some activities in additional layers that could be completed if you had more time and more resources. But the very essentials are right here in the center. So to find out more about this model, there are 2 readings that we recommend. One is from Educational Technology Research and Development, and the other is from Educational Technology, and you can see the citations here. So find out about the layers of necessity instructional design model. It's a great thing to know if you are interviewing for an instructional design job and the interviewer asks you, what would you do if you had 2 weeks and very limited budget to complete a project? You can't feasibly do a model like the Dick and Carey model by yourself within 2 weeks to just complete an instructional design project. You could have a response like, I would work through the layers of necessity instructional design model, and I would pick the essential activities to make sure that this project is completed within the time frame, and I could do things like a situational assessment rather than a full-blown needs analysis. So it'd be a great response in an interview situation, or it could be a defense to someone wanting to know why you are making certain decisions within your instructional design process that may look like you're speeding up certain steps or overlooking certain steps or abbreviating certain steps in a more traditional instructional design process. The layers of necessity instructional design model is an accepted model, and it does provide support for efficiency and creating instructional design product that is adequate within given constraints. So it's a more realistic model that you can use in your practice.